Hello, this is Gina Piscatelli at Madison Area Technical College with the third lecture on the skeletal system for students in A&P1. In this lecture, we'll talk about appositional bone growth and bone remodeling. The details that you should pay attention to are listed in study question number 12 and number 13. So last time we talked about ossification, which is defined as the formation of bone. We know this occurs during development in the embryo, the fetus, and in childhood. And bone elongation continues throughout childhood into adolescence and the late teens. At the same time that the bone elongates, the compact bone in the shaft or at the edge and the surface of the bone will widen. That process, bone widening, continues into adulthood. And another process involving ossification continues into adulthood, and that is bone remodeling. So we're going to focus this lecture on bone widening and bone remodeling. So we know that bone growth during adolescence involves the elongation of the bone, and that elongation occurs at the epiphyseal plates where chondrocytes multiply by the process of mitosis. Sometimes we say that chondrocytes are proliferating. And the usual process of endochondral ossification occurs, which involves, of course, death of the cartilage, and then osteoblasts infiltrate and ossification occurs. At the same time that a bone is elongating during childhood and adolescence, it widens. And this occurs in the compact bone at the surface of the bone. Osteoblasts deposit matrix and produce additional lamella on the edge of every osteon. And this process is called appositional growth. So bone widening process is by appositional growth. Now post-adolescence, no further growth in length can occur. And this is because the epiphyseal plate, which had chondrocytes, is converted to bone. It has completely ossified. There are no longer chondrocytes at this location. Now there's just osteoblasts. So now instead of calling it the epiphyseal plate, we call it the epiphyseal line. However, bone widening may still occur. It might occur for a little while, depending on stressors, which we'll talk about later. But that bone widening slows with age. So you can see in the picture in below left, the width of the compact bone in someone who is age 24 versus age 77. So the width of the bone decreases, and that's because bone deposition decreases with age. Now the process of appositional growth is very similar to intramembranous ossification. There are osteoblasts just beneath the periosteum, that connective tissue that covers the outside of the bone, and these osteoblasts deposit osteoid tissue on the surface of the bone. Now remember, osteoid tissue is soft, so mineralization still needs to take place with the depositing of minerals like calcium and phosphorus. So this adds new lamella to existing osteons. Now, so that the bone doesn't become too heavy, even though it's getting wider, the inside of the bone from the marrow cavity are osteoclasts. They line that marrow cavity and they resorb the bone matrix. So while you get a wider bone, you're also getting a wider marrow cavity. And I think this picture explains it pretty well. If this is the starting size of the bone, we do see an increase in the width of the compact bone, maybe quite an increase, but then the inside is hollowed out by osteoclasts that have the ability to destroy or break down or resorb matrix. Now, post-adolescence, appositional growth occurs with bone remodeling. So remodeling of our bone is a process that takes place throughout our entire life. It does slow with age, and it involves two processes: osteoblasts depositing matrix and osteoclasts removing matrix. This allows the bone to change shape. It might cause a widening in the region of a bone, as we can see where the red circle is. Notice how this femur is a little wide, wrong color, sorry, is a little bit wider here, not as distinct. As far as the trochanters go. And it also might cause just the pattern of spongy bone trabeculae to change in response to where weight-bearing stress is located, or maybe where the most muscle activity is located. So the lines of stress are shown in the lower right picture on the head of a femur and the greater trochanter. And you can see that the trabeculae are thicker where the lines of stress are. In this region that I'm circling in yellow, that region has fewer trabeculae or spicules, and that's because there isn't as much stress placed at that angle on the bone. So the ability to change the spongy bone as well as change the compact bone on the surface continues throughout life. The bone remodeling process, as I mentioned, involves two types of cells. Osteoclasts break down old bone, and osteoblasts build new bone. So even though there was no damage to the bone, and this is at the surface in the compact bone region, but the same thing happens in the spongy bone. Even though there's no damage here, we still break down bone and build new bone throughout our lives. It's kind of a refreshing process. So this is a summary of the bone cell functions during appositional growth as well as bone remodeling. Osteoblasts work on the surface, and they can help with either bone remodeling, just replacing what's already there, or bone widening through appositional growth. Also, osteoclasts play a role. So if it's bone widening through appositional growth that's taking place, the osteoclasts are going to have to break down some of the bone that's near the medullary cavity so that the bone doesn't get too thick. If instead what's happening is bone remodeling, typically you'll have an osteoclast break down a region first, and then the osteoblast will form new matrix. So I have a video to show you about bone remodeling, and I'm going to hope that this is going to work. It may or may not, but I will post the link as well. If I ever get there. Okay. Here we go. Well, I hope that part was enjoyable for you. I will post